Imagine trying to capture um, the entire spectrum of human psychological collapse.
Right.
And then on top of that, giving the exact roadmap to profound singing joy. And doing all of that in under 30 seconds.
It sounds impossible, honestly.
Yeah, it really does. Usually when we invite you on a deep dive, we are staring down just this massive mountain of information.
Oh, for sure. Like hundreds of pages.
Exactly. We're translating dense historical accounts or, massive biographies, complex scientific white papers. The expectation is always volume.
Yeah, we usually have a lot of ground to cover.
But today, our source material isn't a mountain at all. It is exactly 6 short sentences.
Which is just an incredible exercise in brevity. I mean, you could read the entire document aloud before your morning coffee even finishes brewing.
You really could. And that is the mission for today's deep dive. We
Yeah.
are doing a microscopic, literally word-by-word exploration of a single text.
And this is Psalm 13, right?
Yes, specifically the English Standard Version translation, or the ESV. And the central question we're trying to unpack today is how a text this incredibly short manages to capture such a massive, universal human experience.
Because it really does cover a lot of emotional ground.
It does. We are tracking this journey from absolute crushing despair to profound joy. And it all happens within the space of like a single breath.
The efficiency of the language is honestly what stands out immediately. I mean, the text wastes absolutely no time trying to ease the reader in.
No, not at all. Actually, to set the scene for you, before the actual sentences even begin, we get 2 very specific text headers.
Right, the metadata, basically.
Yeah. The document announces itself as a Psalm of David and then gives a direct structural instruction to the choir master.
Which is such a fascinating detail to include right up front.
It is. And then, boom, it just drops you straight into the deep end of human suffering.
Yeah.
There is no polite introduction.
None.
It just hits you with raw, unvarnished anguish right out of the gate.
Yeah, the speaker doesn't offer any pleasantries to the divine. It's just a visceral expression of feeling completely abandoned. And it uses this brutal kind of percussive repetition.
Oh man, that repetition completely dominates the opening sequence. 4 times in rapid succession, the text just hammers us with this agonizing question. How long?
It's intense.
It reads, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me?"
Yeah, that fourfold repetition, it actually mimics the psychological experience of time dilation.
More like time dilation.
Right, like when you are in severe pain,
Yeah.
every single second just drags.
Oh, absolutely. It feels like forever.
So the how long becomes this steady, almost physical drumbeat of panic.
Okay, let's unpack this because there is a very deliberate progression of despair happening here. It's not just, the random list of complaints.
No, it's highly structured.
Right. First, the speaker feels completely abandoned by the divine. Will you forget me forever and hide your face from me?
The ultimate silent treatment.
Exactly. Then the torture moves inward. Take counsel in my soul and sorrow in my heart. And I really want to pause on that phrase. Take counsel in my soul.
It's a great line.
To me, that feels like the ancient equivalent of doom scrolling, but like happening entirely inside your own mind.
Oh, that's a perfect way to describe it because the psychology behind that is actually quite devastating.
So?
Well, when you are cut off from external guidance, like when the heavens are silent, your brain just starts looping. Human beings have an inherent negativity bias.
Right, we always look for the danger.
Exactly. Which means, in the absence of new information, our minds naturally gravitate toward worst-case scenarios just to protect us.
Wow.
So if you are taking counsel only in your own soul, you're trapped in an echo chamber of your own making. You're just bouncing terrible ideas off the walls of an isolated brain.
Which produces the exact result the text describes, right? Sorrow in my heart all the day.
Exactly.
And then finally, the despair moves outward to a physical threat. The enemy be exalted over me.
What's fascinating here is that specific structural movement.
Yeah.
If you track the perspective of the speaker in these opening lines, their gaze follows a distinct downward trajectory.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, first, they're looking up at the heavens, crying out to a divine figure who just seems to be hiding. Then, their gaze drops inwards, spiraling down into the isolation of their own rumination, taking that internal counsel.
The doom scrolling.
The doom scrolling, right. And finally, they look straight ahead at their physical surroundings where they see their literal enemy winning.
So it's heaven, self, circumstance.
Exactly. It is a complete 360-degree survey of total abandonment.
Man, Everywhere the speaker looks, whether it's up, in, or out, there is only evidence that they're totally alone and losing.
It's suffocating.
And we should probably clarify the stakes of that enemy for a moment, too. Given the attribution to David, who was an ancient king, we aren't talking about, like, a frustrating coworker or some metaphorical hurdle.
No, not at all. In the historical context of the ancient Near East, an exalted enemy meant literal, physical destruction.
Right.
It meant armies, spears, exile, and death. The threat is completely visceral.
That's terrifying.
It is. So when the speaker is scanning their environment, they are internalizing a very real existential physical threat while simultaneously dealing with the psychological collapse of feeling spiritually abandoned.
But I mean, the human brain can't sustain that level of isolated panic indefinitely, right? Eventually, the pressure cooker has to vent.
It always does.
And that brings us to a really fascinating psychological pivot in the text. The speaker stops spiraling and just starts demanding.
Yeah, we see a drastic shift from passive suffering to active, urgent petition.
The tone shifts completely.
Right.
Like, the language stops being a passive lament and becomes this direct confrontation.
The verbs alone tell the story.
They really do. We go from passive words like hide in sorrow to incredibly forceful, aggressive commands. Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Light up my eyes.
It's a huge shift.
I have to stop here and push back on this, actually, because isn't this incredibly audacious?
Oh, absolutely.
I'm just struggling to understand how someone who, just 5 seconds ago was completely broken and crying about being forgotten forever suddenly finds the nerve to dictate terms. Consider, answer, light up.
Right. On the surface, it feels entirely contradictory. You would expect someone who feels utterly abandoned by an all-powerful being to approach with timidity.
Yeah, like bargaining or begging.
Or groveling. But the speaker doesn't beg, they demand.
It almost borders on disrespectful, considering the assumed power dynamic between a human and the divine.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it actually reveals the underlying mechanics of their relationship.
What do you mean?
The only way you can argue this fiercely, the only way you can issue direct commands like, consider and answer me, is if there is a deeply established foundation of intimacy.
Oh, interesting.
Think about it. You don't yell at a stranger who has forgotten you on the street.
Right.
You yell at a partner, a parent, or a lifelong friend. The audacity of the demand is actually the ultimate proof of closeness. They expect an answer because they firmly believe they have the right to be heard.
Wow, that reframes the entire interaction for me. The anger isn't a sign of lost faith, it's a sign of deep trust.
Exactly. They are angry because the silence violates the established terms of the relationship.
That makes so much sense. So the silence of those first lines, the hiding of the face, is finally broken not by the divine, but by the speaker's own bold voice.
Refusing to just quietly fade away into the dark.
And the stakes of fading away are spelled out in terrifying physical detail. The speaker makes this visceral plea, light up my eyes.
That phrase gives me chills.
Right. If you picture someone deep in clinical depression or physical shock, what happens to their face? The eyes go dull, they hollow out.
They lose the light.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The speaker is asking for the literal, physiological spark of life to be rebooted in their nervous system. And the text hammers home exactly why this has to happen right now, using a terrifying threefold repetition of the word lest.
Wow, the lest cascade.
Yeah.
It builds this incredible sense of rising, immediate panic.
Let's look at it. Lest I sleep the sleep of death. That's number one. Lest my enemies say I have prevailed over him. Number two. And number three, lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken.
The progression there is just chilling.
It really is. It moves from literal physical death to the enemy claiming total victory to an entire community of foes celebrating the speaker's downfall.
It constructs a complete architecture of ruin.
Yeah.
It's not just about the cessation of biological life. It's the fear that their death will be used as a trophy, a validation for the people who want to destroy them.
So the speaker is essentially issuing an ultimatum. Like, if you don't light up my eyes and intervene right now, this silence is going to become permanent, and my enemies are going to throw a parade over my grave.
That's exactly what's happening.
Which makes the sudden shift in the very next sentence entirely jarring. I mean, it is one of the most intense emotional pivots I've ever seen in a text this short.
Oh, the whiplash is real.
The looming threat of those enemies rejoicing is just hanging in the air, and then suddenly everything hinges on one single crucial word that kicks off the final section of the text.
It is the fulcrum upon which the entire psychological journey rests.
The word is but. but I have trusted in your steadfast love.
Incredible.
We go from screaming about the brink of the sleep of death to this profound foundational statement of trust, and it escalates immediately.
Right into praise.
Yes, the text shifts to joy and music. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord. And it ends with this sweeping justification, because he has dealt bountifully with me.
It is a staggering resolution to a crisis that was literally moments ago terminal.
So what does this all mean? Seriously, I'm struggling to connect the dots here.
It's a big leap.
How does a person pivot from bracing for literal death to claiming they have a bountiful life in a single breath? Especially, and this is a detail I just can't get past, especially since the text never actually says the circumstances change.
They don't.
Right. The enemies didn't suddenly pack up their weapons and go home. There is no mention of a rescuing army or a sudden change in weather.
That is the crucial tension of the text. The external reality has not shifted 1 inch.
Wow.
The physical enemies are still standing right there. The threat of the sleep of death is still looming over them.
So what happens?
The transformation that occurs is entirely internal, and it is driven by a very specific psychological mechanism regarding how the speaker orients themselves in time.
Tell me more about that mechanism. How does orienting in time change the immediate threat of a spear to the chest?
Well, look closely at the verb tenses in those final sentences. They are meticulously chosen. Okay. The speaker starts by anchoring themselves in the past tense. I have trusted in your steadfast love.
Oh, past tense, got it.
Yeah. They are retrieving a historical reality, a fixed point in their past where they actually experience safety and connection.
Okay, I see.
By pulling that past memory into their terrifying present, they chemically and psychologically ground themselves. This past anchor unlocks their ability to project into the future. My heart shall rejoice, and I will sing.
That is wild. So by forcing the brain to recall a concrete memory of steadfast love, they're essentially bypassing the amygdala's immediate fear response to the current threat.
Exactly. Past trust provides the fuel for future joy.
They are asserting that their internal historical anchor, this steadfast love, is more dense, more true, and more real than the temporary external reality of the enemies surrounding them.
It is a profound act of cognitive framing. The internal reality is deliberately chosen to override the external panic.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. Because this internal psychological trick brings us back to the actual architecture of the document, the metadata and the context of how this text was delivered.
Right, going back to the beginning.
Yeah, you could easily read this text and assume it's just a deeply private diary entry. I mean, the speaker's talking about taking counsel in their own soul, dealing with sorrow in their own heart. It feels intensely isolated and personal.
The language is fiercely individualistic. It is very much the language of someone alone in the dark.
But then you look at that header we mentioned earlier. This intensely private, agonizing breakdown is explicitly addressed to the choir master.
Which is wild. This raises an important question, doesn't it?
Yeah, why?
Why would anyone take their most vulnerable, isolated moment of feeling completely abandoned by the universe and formalize it into public art?
That's what I don't get. My instinct would be to hide that level of despair. You wouldn't want the community to know you felt forgotten by God. Why hand it over to a professional musician to be arranged for a public performance?
It comes down to the physiological and psychological power of communal liturgy.
Okay, break that down for me.
When you take a private trauma and put it to a shared rhythm and melody, you completely change how a community processes pain.
Oh, I see.
Science actually shows us that when a choir sings together, their breathing and heart rates actually synchronize.
Really? They physically sync up?
Yes. So by handing this over to the choir master, David is taking the chaotic, terrifying transition from how long must I suffer to I will sing and turning it into a regulated biological experience for the entire community.
Oh my gosh, he is giving them a literal script for their own panic attacks.
Exactly. He is providing a roadmap out of the dark.
Wow.
When someone else in that ancient community inevitably felt trapped in their own mind, doom scrolling in their own soul, they didn't have to invent the words to cry out.
The choir master had already taught the choir.
Right. The choir had already sung it to the community, and the most isolating experience in the world became a shared communal reality.
That is beautiful. It normalizes despair and provides the community with a collective mechanism to move through it.
It really does.
That concept of a shared script across time brings us to the modern structural context of this text. The specific translation we're analyzing today is the English Standard Version.
The ESV.
Yeah. And if you look at the metadata for this version, it's copyrighted in 2001 by Crossway, or Good News Publishers, and we are looking at the 2025 text edition.
The contrast between the origins of the text and its modern packaging is quite stark, isn't it?
It really is. I bring this up because it highlights the unbelievable staying power of these 6 sentences. You have this ancient, visceral poem born out of blood and guts terror, the fear of literal spears and the sleep of death in the desert.
Life and death stakes.
And here we are, looking at a sterile, air-conditioned corporate copyright page from a 2025 modern English text edition. You have linguists and scholars agonizing over the placement of commas and the exact modern English equivalent of ancient Hebrew verbs. Why? Because the psychological mechanism this text describes is so incredibly vital that humanity has meticulously preserved it for thousands of years.
That's spot on. The external trappings of our enemies have evolved. I mean, the threats might look different in 2025 than they did when this was first composed.
Definitely fewer literal spears.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
But the human nervous system remains identical.
Yeah.
The internal experience of isolation, the mental echo chamber, the desperate plea for the lights to come back on, that is a universal constant. The meticulous translation process just ensures that the ancient roadmap remains legible for the modern mind.
It is astonishing how much psychological ground we've covered in just a handful of words today.
It really packs a punch.
To recap the journey we just mapped out, the text walks us through 3 distinct, massive phases of the human experience. First, it drops us into the isolating complaint, that echo chamber of despair where the speaker feels abandoned by heaven, trapped in their own soul, and surrounded by threats.
That complete 360-degree survey of human suffering and rumination.
Next, we saw the pressure cooker vent into an urgent petition for life. The speaker refuses the sleep of death and leverages their deep intimacy to boldly demand intervention before the silence becomes permanent.
The audacity to demand, born entirely of a trusted relationship.
And finally, we witnessed that radical cognitive pivot to praise, the hinge of the word but, the choice to anchor the nervous system in a past reality of steadfast love, using it as fuel to confidently sing into an entirely uncertain future.
Grounding the mind in an internal truth to survive an external threat.
I want to speak directly to you listening to this deep dive right now. Every single person has their own how long moments.
Absolutely.
You have absolutely experienced times where you felt completely stuck, taking counsel in your own sorrowing soul, trapped in the echo chamber of your own anxiety.
We all have.
What this tiny ancient text offers is a powerful, formalized reminder that it is entirely okay for you to vocalize that despair. You don't have to pretend you aren't terrified of the metaphorical sleep of death or the very real enemies at your door. You are allowed to demand that the lights be turned back on.
It validates the reality of the darkness before it ever asks you to find the strength to sing.
Yes.
But before we conclude, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, something that builds on the very last phrase of this text.
What is it?
Well, the speaker concludes by saying they will sing because he has dealt bountifully with me.
Right.
But remember the context we just uncovered. This grand statement is coming from someone who, just one breath earlier, was narrowly trying to avoid the sleep of death while watching their enemies exult over them.
That's great.
The external circumstances didn't change. The threat is still standing right in front of them. So here is the question to take with you. Is it possible that true bountiful living isn't actually defined by the absence of enemies or the absence of sorrow? Is it possible that a bountiful life is simply the psychological and spiritual ability to find and trust in steadfast love right in the absolute middle of the chaos?
That is a phenomenal thought to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the microscopic, massive world of Psalm 13. We'll catch you next time.